Good evening and welcome, dear Vice President Schwarzenegger, dear professors and colleagues, members of the faculty, students, guests and friends, ladies and gentlemen. As the Dean of the Faculty of Business Economics and Informatics, it's my great pleasure to welcome you here this evening for the inaugural lecture of our Assistant Professor, Dr. Lauren Howe. Lauren joined us from Stanford to help us shape the future of work. And of course, the future of leadership, which then is an integral part of teams' work and getting forward as a community. Before I dive into a bit more of a detail of her research, I'd like to give just a brief outline of her steps in the career, so to speak, which actually started very exciting from a German perspective, German language perspective. She started as a BA in psychology, and German language and literature. So feel free for the upper to talk in German to Lauren. At the University of Virginia, Charlottesville, she then did a PhD in psychology at the Department of Psychology in Stanford, where she also continued as a postdoctoral researcher until 2019, before we could grab her to come to Zurich as a postdoc, and then, of course, in the ramp up to become assistant professor in management with a focus on the future of work. Of course, this is also presented on the slide as her talk. She received very many honors, and I'd like to name a few of the research grants that you were getting, especially those who were very well connected to the University of Zurich, which is the Young Researchers Grant for postdoctoral fellowship, but also a DSI, Digital Society Initiative Grant, a DITS, Digital Initiative, the Zurich Education System, or Hochschulen grants, and the DSI seed funding project. And for some of it, using technology like virtual reality. Work, virtual reality, where is the connection? Psychology, work, and business administration, where is the connection? I think the connection is in the works. It is in the papers, for example. I'd like to highlight, just very, very briefly, no worries, 5 of them. Some of them very well cited. So the first one, of course, it's a very recent one. It's called the Patient's Physical Response to Healthcare Treatments. These are influenced by provider race and gender. Second one to be mentioned is Acknowledging Uncertainty Impacts Public Acceptance of Climate Scientists' Predictions. So there's hope on that end. And out of the health psychology, there's a paper about the placebo effect. Harnessing the placebo effect, exploring the influence of physician characteristics on placebo responses. And one more, the attitude strength, which is the most cited paper so far. There's, of course, more to come. It's a long trajectory. And finally, I'd like to mention one, which also addresses an area where I'm familiar with, which is called software engineering, something weird where we build things that are big and artificial, in a sense. And it talks about productivity of software developer teams. So there must be a connection between social psychology, even software development, and other areas in the field. So this is something very interesting where Lauren has built bridges to different subject matter areas in the university, in the Department of Business Administration, and of course, in the Center of Leadership for the Future of Work. She's also covered in media. And there's a long list of things I could name. I just highlight one, which is about work relationships in the workplace, so to speak, and why they matter. So the case for managerial decency or building emotional resources in your business are key aspects of her work that she talks about very often. We are very happy to have you in our faculty, and I'd like to welcome you for your inaugural talk. Please join me in welcoming Lauren.
Thank you so much, Harold, for the very kind introduction, and thank all of you for being here tonight. I'm excited to share some research that I've started since I joined the University of Zurich at the Center for Leadership in the Future of Work. I've called this talk The Human Side of the Future of Work, and first I want to describe what I mean by that. In my ongoing research here at the University of Zurich, I look at the future of work through two lenses. The first lens is that I examine how human beliefs shape our approach to the future of work. The second lens is that I examine how being more human, focusing on people and showing one's human sides, contributes to effective leadership in the future of work. And today, I want to share studies that are representative of several lines of research that adopt these two lenses. First, I want to turn to how we can understand the future of work better by getting inside people's heads, to unpack how people imagine the future of work and how that shapes what they do with regard to the future today. And this line of research very much aligns with my previous interest in placebo effects, how our beliefs can actually shape the world around us. So to get started, let's imagine the future of work together. I want you to consider this question. Imagine that it's about a decade in the future and you are in the year 2032. If you browse job postings, what kinds of jobs would you see? What skills would be necessary for these jobs, and what kind of skills would be valued by employers? Take a moment to reflect on this and notice what's coming to your mind. Now, this question of what skills will be valued in the future of work is something that concerns many organizations who are studying the future of work. Rapid technological advancements mean that machines are changing jobs, and humans will need to gain new skills in order to remain employable. Because of this, the World Economic Forum has even called for a global reskilling revolution, stating that the world is facing a reskilling emergency, as by 2030, 1 billion people will need to be reskilled. But what skills will people need to remain employable? Of course, as technology plays an ever more prominent role, one set of skills that will be critically important are technical skills, learning how to build, design, and work with machines and artificial intelligence. But as I looked into predictions of how technology will change the world of work, I was quite inspired to see that, alongside technical skills, skills that we might think of as fundamentally human also seem to have a solid place in the future of work. For example, a team of scientists from Oxford calculated how likely it is that jobs will be automated by looking at bottlenecks that prevent machines from taking over these jobs. Out of 3 sets of bottlenecks, one is related to social intelligence, involving fundamentally human skills like social perceptiveness, negotiation and persuasion, and assisting and caring for others. These, of course, are skills that machines just aren't good at least not yet. And this bottleneck shows that as automation changes jobs, this human side of work will remain much needed. And this makes sense if you think about it. As technology changes jobs, it often does so in ways that make social-emotional skills more important. For instance, if you're a financial advisor, you might spend a little bit less time coming up with the ideal financial portfolio for your clients, because computers are very good at that, and a little more time advising your clients to act on this good advice, something that requires fundamentally human skills. Beyond this research, other experts predict that combining technical skills with socio-emotional skills will be key in future jobs. For instance, Tom Friedman, a journalist who's written extensively about the future of work, said, "I think the companies that are doing best are creating what I call STEMpathy jobs, jobs that combine science, technology, engineering, and math with human empathy, the ability to connect with another human being. When you put those two things together in a manager or in an employee, I think you have a sweet spot of where work has to go." So there seems to be a place for fundamentally human skills alongside technical skills in the future of work. But we thought that when people imagine the future of work, they might overlook this more socio-emotional side of the future of work. Given that so much of the discussion about the future of work revolves around technology and how it's changing the world of work, people might imagine that what we really need to prepare for the future of work is to bolster up our technical skills, to learn more how to work with machines and artificial intelligence, but maybe neglecting the more socio-emotional skills that will also be valued. And this might then lead individuals to neglect developing these skills when they prepare for the future of work. Supporting this idea, theories of skill development suggest that people invest in training the skills that they predict will be most useful for them personally in the future. So we thought the same might be true for skills that people think will be valued because of larger scale trends in the future of work. So if people imagine a future that only focuses on technology and don't see its socio-emotional side, they might make certain decisions in the present, like deciding to expand opportunities to train technical skills, creating more technical job opportunities, and so on, in ways that might lead to a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, a highly technical world of work that misses the opportunity to bring in socio-emotional aspects. And if people underrepresent the need for socio-emotional skills in the future of work, when it comes to how people feel about the future of work, we theorize that there might be some gender differences. If visions of the future of work focus only on technology and its place in the future, they represent the world of work in a stereotypically masculine way. For example, women have been underrepresented relative to men in technical fields for decades and into today. Further, people often stereotype STEM fields, these science, technology, engineering, and math fields, as geeky, masculine, and socially isolating. Women feel less like they'll fit in these kinds of careers and are driven out of these fields. But if the socio-emotional side of these fields that is also there is made apparent, that is, if women are encouraged to view STEM fields as socially oriented, such as involving collaboration and pro-social goals, this more inclusive depiction sparks women's interest in these career paths. So hyper-focusing only on technology in the future of work and missing the need for socio-emotional skills that is also there might make women feel more negative and less positive about the future. But if you can broaden visions of the future of work to acknowledge that social and emotional skills will be important alongside technical skills, as indeed many researchers, experts, and organizations predict, this vision of the future may be more inclusive and inspiring. So first, do people overlook the need for social and emotional skills in the future of work? To get at this question, we conducted a study with people who are training to become part of the future workforce and who, since we are all at a university today, are likely to be a particularly important population to us in this room, current undergraduate students. We recruited 800 students from the US and the UK and asked them to spend 5 minutes reflecting on the very question that I posed to you. Imagine it's a decade in the future. What kinds of skills will be valued in jobs? Then we coded these responses for how often they mention technical skills or socio-emotional skills. Here are some examples of each category. Skills with technology, STEM jobs, robotics, and artificial intelligence on the one side, and social skills, emotional intelligence, and collaboration and working in teams on the other. What we found is that students were much less likely to mention socio-emotional skills in their descriptions of the future of work and what they thought it would entail than technical skills. Students listed 2.9 times as many technical skills compared to socio-emotional skills. In fact, 61.9% of students, almost 2/3, never mentioned a socio-emotional skill when writing about the future of work, while only 19.1% did not mention a technical skill. And we didn't just see this among students. In other studies that involved executives in the C-suite and other top positions, as well as journalists writing about the future of work, these groups also focused on the technical side of the future of work and neglected its socio-emotional side. But can you change the way that people envision the future of work by changing the narrative about the future of work? In the same study, we next gave students different descriptions of the future of work, built on experts' real statements about the future. Some students read that the future of work will be technological and involve growth in STEM fields and so on. Other students read that the future of work would be socio-emotional as well as technological and would involve growth in STEMpathy fields and so on. Then we asked students what kinds of classes their university should expand to prepare students for the future of work. In one question, they chose between technical classes or socio-emotional classes so we could see what they thought was most important when push came to shove. What we found was that students who read the technical narrative about the future of work were much less likely to say that their university should expand socio-emotional classes. Less than 1/3 said that these classes should be expanded in the future. But this was more evenly split when students imagined the future of work as technical and socio-emotional, then there was room to prioritize both skill sets. So this illustrates one way in which beliefs about the future of work, whether it's imagined as only technical or also as including socio-emotional aspects, affects how society prepares for the future, through the kinds of skills that the future workforce deems most exciting and worthy to develop. And I think that this suggests that narratives in society may need to more explicitly encourage people to train socio-emotional skills alongside technical skills. Otherwise, these skills may start to be neglected, since default visions of the future of work seem to have a bit of a blind spot for the need for these skills. Now, how might men and women respond differently to these visions of the future of work? After students read about one of the two descriptions of the future of work, we asked them to rate the extent to which they felt a series of emotions when they thought about the future of work, some positive, like excited and enthusiastic, and some negative, like distressed, upset, and scared. What we found was that when the future of work was only depicted as technical, women reported less positive and more negative emotion compared to men. But when the future of work was depicted as technical and socio-emotional, there were no gender gaps in emotion. And we found similar results when we looked not just at students, but also at working adults in the US. So to sum up this line of research in one takeaway, we see that beliefs about the future of work affect how we prepare for it, and that default visions of the future of work that may risk overlooking its socio-emotional side might contribute to existing gender divides. So we as a society may need to get the message more explicitly out there about the socio-emotional side of the future of work, or we may wander together into a future of work that is more narrowly technical and less inclusive. Now I want to turn to the next line of research that examines another angle of beliefs and their importance in the future of work, how mindsets about specific skills shape the future of work. I got very interested in the fact that when experts do discuss the more fundamentally human skills needed in the future of work, the dialogue around these skills often portrays them as hard to learn. For instance, the Pew Research Center surveyed experts about which skills they thought would be most valued in the future of work, and noted in their report that tough-to-teach intangibles, such as emotional intelligence, curiosity, and so on, would be most highly valued, but that soft skills are difficult to teach and difficult to evaluate in any kind of clear-cut and objective manner in any setting. They later then posted on their Twitter account, on the one hand, calling for skills like empathy as important, but then re-emphasizing these skills as tough-to-teach intangibles. And what I found troubling about this dialogue is that we actually know from past research that these skills can be learned and developed. For example, 2 meta-analyses of more than 50 studies have found that emotional intelligence can be enhanced through training. And a meta-analysis of 18 randomized controlled trials found that training can also enhance empathy. So the view of socio-emotional skills as difficult to train that seems to be out there from these dialogues is somewhat inaccurate. So right away, this dialogue reminded me of psychological research on fixed and growth mindsets. This research suggests that when it comes to thinking about a personal attribute, people can endorse a more fixed mindset about this attribute. That is, they believe that it is stable and fixed and doesn't change. Or people can endorse a more growth mindset about this attribute, that it can be changed and developed over time. These mindsets exist along a continuum, meaning that people generally fall somewhere along the continuum of holding a more fixed mindset to a more growth mindset. Importantly, in most cases, both mindsets hold some truth to them. For example, people may have baseline levels of empathy and emotional intelligence, but these attributes can also be trained and improved upon. So what mindsets do, as I've examined in some of my past research, is that they selectively orient people more towards one of these truths over the other, and thus shape how people interpret and react to the world around them. And mindsets are consequential. For instance, fixed mindsets lead people to persist less when challenges are encountered, because these challenges are interpreted as a sign that a person is just not good at something, whereas growth mindsets lead people to be more willing to try out new strategies and to persist. People with a fixed mindset also tend to react more defensively and to experience more negative emotions like shame when a setback happens compared to people with growth mindsets. Because for people with fixed mindsets, these setbacks are linked to something about who you are as a person. Given this evidence about fixed mindsets, we wondered, might people hold more fixed mindsets about these key socio-emotional skills in ways that could impede their development? So to get a sense of the scale of this problem, we conducted a survey in 35 countries around the world, aiming to have at least a few different countries on all of the continents except Antarctica, and to recruit at least 500 working adults per country. And we measured beliefs about different attributes. 2 socio-emotional, namely emotional intelligence and empathy, as 2 key skills in the future of work, and 2 cognitive, intelligence and programming aptitude. For example, here's what this looked like for participants who were randomly assigned to evaluate emotional intelligence. We provided them with a short definition and then measured the extent to which they held a fixed mindset using items like, people have a certain amount of emotional intelligence and they can't really do much to change it. For participants who responded about empathy, we simply replaced the definition of empathy and the words in the questions below, and followed the same procedure for mindsets about intelligence and mindsets about programming aptitude. And what we saw is that the majority of participants, over 55% in each case, held more of a growth mindset about intelligence and programming aptitude. But a minority of participants held a growth mindset about emotional intelligence and empathy. About 7% more held a fixed mindset about emotional intelligence and the cognitive skills, and about 11% held a more fixed mindset about empathy, showing how empathy in particular is seen as less able to be trained and developed. So across the globe, mindsets about socio-emotional skills were more fixed than for the cognitive attributes. In fact, in 26 out of the 35 countries, over 3/4 of those that were surveyed, empathy was perceived as the most fixed skill, while in an additional 7 countries, emotional intelligence was perceived as most fixed. This means that in 33 out of the 35 countries surveyed, or 94.3%, socio-emotional skills were seen as more fixed than the cognitive attributes. So why might this matter? As we increasingly call for employees and leaders to develop qualities like empathy and emotional intelligence, we may need first to encourage the view that these skills can, in fact, be learned and developed. Further, in the global survey, we found that when individuals held more fixed mindsets about these skills, they tended to rate these skills as less important to the future of work. So this suggests that a more fixed view of these skills, as seems to be prevalent in some dialogues around these skills, might lead us again away from a path towards a more socio-emotional future of work, and shows one way in which our mindsets about skills matter for how we shape the future of work. Interestingly, there was also a similar dialogue around another relevant skill that became particularly prominent during the pandemic: remote work. As we saw, and maybe as we also personally felt during lockdown, some people just seemed to adjust to remote work a bit better than others. And I found it interesting that many of the articles that came out about remote work during the pandemic raised this question: do some people just have characteristics that make them better than others at working remotely? Like this article from the BBC with the headline, "In a world of telework, some people just take better to working from home. Does this productivity come naturally, or can you learn it?" And the answer is, of course, that it's actually a bit of both. So again, these societal conversations reminded me of research on mindsets. So we examined whether people might hold fixed mindsets about remote work, viewing it as something that people are either naturally good at or not, and that can't be changed, versus more growth mindsets about remote work, viewing it as a skill that can be learned and developed. And we theorized that those who have a fixed mindset about remote work might struggle more when it comes to adjusting to remote work. If you think that you're just not the kind of person who's good at working remotely, when the inevitable challenges surface during remote work, like feeling frustrated or distracted, you might become more likely to feel anxious or irritable, thinking, "I'm just not good at this." So people who hold a more fixed mindset about remote work might feel more negative emotion and less positive emotion during home office than those who have a growth mindset. And given a large literature which links the emotions that we feel during work to productivity, we thought that if people who have more fixed mindsets about remote work feel more anxious, irritable, or other negative emotions, they might have lower productivity when working from home compared to those who have a more growth mindset about remote work. So we examined these questions in a longitudinal study of 113 employees in Switzerland who were working in home office during the first COVID lockdown, so employees who needed to rapidly adjust to working remotely. First, we measured their mindsets about remote work using questions similar to those used to measure mindsets in the global survey, like you are either the kind of person who is good at working remotely or not, and you can't really do much to change it. Then over the course of the next 3 weeks, we asked employees to report how often they felt positive and negative emotions while they were working, as well as how productive they felt while they were working. We found that holding a more fixed mindset about remote work was associated with increased negative emotion during remote work, like feeling anxious or irritable, and decreased positive emotion during remote work, like feeling excited and determined. Further, negative emotions were associated with employees' productivity during remote work on the following week. That is, employees who held more fixed mindsets about remote work felt more frustrated and guilty during 1 week, and this was associated with feeling less productive the following week. So mindsets about remote work were associated with emotional adjustment and productivity in home office, again suggesting, like the previous study, that when it comes to the future of work, it's important to pay attention to these mindsets and how they affect people's responses to changes in the nature and structure of work. So to sum up the key takeaway from these lines of research, mindsets about socio-emotional skills are viewed as more fixed, which relates to them being seen as less valuable in the future of work. And mindsets about new ways of working are associated with how people adjust to these new work modes. This all suggests that to help students, employees, and leaders develop key skills in the future of work and adapt to new ways of working, it's important to consider the mindsets they may hold and their effects. Now I want to turn to the second lens through which I study the future of work, how being more human makes leaders more effective. And I want to start by looking at leaders who explicitly emphasize a focus on people in critical times. As COVID-19 unfolded, I began to look at transcripts of earnings conference calls. These are calls between top executives and financial analysts who are evaluating their companies. And I looked at calls in which COVID-19 was being discussed. One thing that struck me from reading these transcripts was that CEOs across companies sometimes had very different responses to the crisis. Specifically, some CEOs took the time to mention the human costs of the crisis, costs to human safety, health, and well-being. For instance, here is Anders Gustafsson, the CEO of Zebra, a tech hardware company, who in these earnings calls said, "I'll start by saying our first priority is making sure that our employees, partners, and customers are safe. And this is a human story more than anything, I think." But some CEOs did not mention these human costs. For example, here is Robert Painter, the CEO of Trimble, another hardware tech company, who said, "Okay, then there's the COVID-19 topic. We find ourselves in a more challenged environment here at the moment. We believe we can still prevail through that. And we look at the long baseline record of the company, and we've sold in up markets and down markets and come out of down markets reasonably fast." So he's just focusing on the potential economic costs of the crisis for the company without acknowledging the crisis's cost on human health and well-being. Now, COVID-19 was, of course, a time of unprecedented financial crisis, as shown in this graph of the Russell 3000 index. This is the 3,000 largest publicly traded companies in the United States, which represents 98% of the total US public equity market. From the time period of February 24th, 2020 to March 20th, 2020, there was a massive decline in the value of these companies on the stock market that was prompted by COVID-19, as you can see from this large drop here. The negative impact of the crisis on the stock market was even stronger than the 2008 to 2009 financial crisis. So it makes sense that many CEOs would be concerned about the economic costs of this crisis. But we wondered, might the focus that some CEOs show on human costs pay off in some ways in this very human crisis? That is, might companies fare better on the stock market if CEOs focus on the human costs of COVID-19 as well as its economic costs? And we expected that this might be the case because many theories of leadership suggest that leaders who are focused on people as well as results should be more effective. So to look at this question, we coded transcripts of earnings conference calls from the onset of COVID-19, January to March 2020, for the number of times that a CEO mentioned human and economic costs. First, we found that of the 448 total CEOs who spoke about COVID-19 in these calls, almost all of them, 96.9%, mentioned economic costs. But only 51.8% took the time to mention the crisis's human costs. Then we examined cumulative stock returns during this crisis period. How well did these companies fare on the stock market as it was plummeting? What we found was that acknowledging human costs made a difference, but acknowledging economic costs did not. So for all of the statistics fans who might be in the audience, the effect was such that a 1 standard deviation increase in acknowledgement of human costs was associated with a 2.12 percentage points higher cumulative returns during the crisis. To translate this into tangible economic value, given that the median market value of equity of the companies in our sample was approximately $3.17 billion, This effect amounts to around 67 million of firm value that was preserved in the wake of the crisis. So this shows a way in which CEOs' leadership that focuses explicitly on people might pay off in a very financial sense. So in sum, the companies of CEOs who acknowledge the cost that the COVID-19 crisis has on human safety, health, and well-being fared better on the stock market during the crash prompted by the crisis, illustrating how leadership that is focused on people is associated with tangible economic value in critical times. Now, the final research lines I want to share with you build on this theme of putting the human more into leadership, examining how leaders can show their more human sides in ways that make them more effective. If you look at wildly successful entrepreneurs, for example, like entrepreneur turned billionaire Richard Branson, it stands out that these business leaders sometimes readily expose their all too human sides. For example, Richard Branson has said, "Believe it or not, I'm naturally shy. My shyness has never disappeared completely. I still get nervous from time to time." Given that we might expect that it's the leaders who are most confident or otherwise unshakable who rise to the top, it's interesting to see how often it is that, in fact, it's the nervous, shy, or socially awkward individuals who make it, even in competitive business settings like entrepreneurs seeking funding for their ventures. So I began to wonder, might some entrepreneurs succeed not despite, but perhaps because of their flaws? Could there be benefits to exposing one's all-too-human failings when it comes to soliciting investments for one's ventures? And one reason why exposing human failings could benefit entrepreneurs is because these flaws could create a sense of shared similarity between an entrepreneur who exposes a flaw and an investor who shares that same flaw. In fact, that similarity breeds connection is a fundamental principle in psychology and other literatures. So investors who've dealt with flaws themselves might feel a bond with entrepreneurs who share that same shortcoming. And in the entrepreneurship literature, it has also been found that similarity predicts investment decisions. So if a nervous and insecure entrepreneur like Richard Branson shares the shortcoming with an investor who's also struggled with insecurity, maybe it would draw that investor towards the entrepreneur and make them more likely to support the entrepreneur's cause financially. But importantly, we thought that not all kinds of flaws might have that effect. We proposed that there are certain kinds of flaws that can build interpersonal connection via shared similarities and those that cannot. Specifically, we theorized that there are two types of flaws: bridging flaws and distancing flaws. Bridging flaws indicate a deficit of a socially desirable trait, and distancing flaws indicate an excess of a socially desirable trait. For example, take the socially desirable trait of self-confidence. A person who falls short on this desirable standard, they lack self-confidence, would possess the bridging flaw of insecurity. But a person who falls too high on this desirable standard, they have an excess of self-confidence, would possess the distancing flaw of arrogance, too much of this self-confidence. And we thought that it might be only the bridging flaws that are capable of creating a sense of shared similarity. We thought that this is because bridging flaws, those that indicate a lack of some kind of desirable quality, would indicate vulnerability and perhaps encourage similar investors, those who share that same flaw, to reach out and support the venture that a flawed entrepreneur is pursuing. But distancing flaws, however, because they indicate that a person is superior to others by virtue of having an excess of a desirable trait, might not create a bond, even when an investor shares the same flaw. We know that superiority sets a person apart from others and can undermine social connection. So perhaps these flaws fail to draw in investors, even if they share that same flaw. To test these ideas, we recruited people on Reddit, an internet forum, to play an investment game in which we embedded an experiment. We posted the game on a Reddit subforum dedicated to entrepreneurship to get an engaged sample of investing enthusiasts interested in startups. We gave participants $10 that they could invest across 18 different startups. Here are some examples of what participants saw: short descriptions of startups framed as quotes from that startup's CEO. For example, we had startups focused on treadmills that let you run through virtual environments, ethical fashion, smart clothing, and so on. And investors earned money in the game depending on how well the startups they invested in did on their actual crowdfunding campaigns. We did change the names of the startups so that people couldn't cheat the system. And investors could get a return on their investments ranging from 40 cents, losing almost everything, to $30, tripling their investment. Where the experiment was is that we varied whether, in the descriptive quotes about the startup from the entrepreneur who was the CEO of the venture, whether the entrepreneur either did not expose a flaw, exposed the bridging flaw of insecurity, or exposed the distancing flaw of arrogance. To show what I mean by this, here is one description of a startup, Zenware, where they did not disclose a flaw. Here's that same description, but with a bridging flaw also added, where the person says, "I'm not the most confident person. Some might even describe me as insecure." Here, the entrepreneur exposes a distancing flaw, saying, "I'm an extremely confident person. Some people might even describe me as cocky." At the beginning of the survey, before they played the investment game, we also asked the investors to self-categorize to the extent to which they possessed this flaw or not, embedded in a personality inventory that they completed, so that we could have a measure of whether these investors shared that same flaw that was exposed by the entrepreneur. So to fully lay out the study design now, out of 18 startups, investors read about 6 where the entrepreneur exposed no flaw, 6 where they exposed a bridging flaw, and 6 where they exposed a distancing flaw. And then we examined how much money investors gave to the startups, depending on what flaw the investors themselves possessed and what flaw the entrepreneurs of the different startups had disclosed. What we found is that the effect of exposing flaws on fundraising success was dependent on the type of flaw as well as whether the investors themselves shared that flaw. First, let's take a look at the investments of the investors who identified as arrogant. The distribution of arrogant investors among the different entrepreneurs who exposed a distancing flaw, bridging flaw, or no flaw was not different from chance if they distributed their investments equally among these different groups. So exposing flaws did not seem to have a strong effect for arrogant investors. Turning to investors who self-identified as insecure, we found that their distribution of their investments did differ from chance. Investors who self-identified as insecure invested $53 more total in entrepreneurs who shared this bridging flaw than entrepreneurs who did not expose any flaw, and invested $68 less in entrepreneurs who exposed a distancing flaw, that opposing flaw that they did not share. So this shows a way in which entrepreneurs, leaders who are starting their own business, can show their more human sides in ways that support their success. But this only holds when investors share that same flaw as the entrepreneurs, and when the flaw that is exposed is a bridging flaw, one that indicates a lack of something desirable rather than an excess. So this research illustrates how exposing all too human failings can sometimes be a strength rather than a weakness, but also shows some important caveats about being all too human. Some flaws don't serve to connect us with others. So now finally, I want to share with you another line of research that builds on similar ideas, in which we wondered how another class of business leaders might expose their more human sides and whether this might have any benefits. We wondered, how do CEOs, as top business leaders, show their all too human sides? And to examine this, I turned to the New York Times Corner Office column, which interviews CEOs and asks them to tell a more personal story about themselves. And one thing that I noticed when I was reading these interviews, which I thought was so interesting, was that a lot of CEOs emphasized that they had previous experience working in jobs that we might think of as pretty lowly, unglamorous, or ordinary. For example, here's an interview with Cheryl Palmer, CEO of the home building company Taylor Morrison. She said, "At 15, I got a job at McDonald's and worked there through high school and college," and goes on to say how every 16-year-old should work at McDonald's and how you learn so many life lessons from that job. In these interviews, CEOs like Cheryl Palmer could choose to talk about almost anything from their personal history. But she chooses to talk about how she got experience in this more ordinary kind of job and saw it as an important part of her origin story, something she learned valuable lessons from. So I wondered if this might be a way in which CEOs emphasize their more human side. So first we wanted to figure out how often CEOs might be doing this. So we coded a set of 190 interviews from the Corner Office column as to whether CEOs mentioned these more ordinary jobs during the interview. And we found that about 15.7% of the CEOs disclosed experience in ordinary jobs. Here are some examples. CEOs were paper boys, worked in warehouses, were janitors, scooped ice cream, and worked in a grocery store. Now, might emphasizing one's human sides by disclosing experience in ordinary jobs benefit CEOs in some way? To get at this in a real-world setting, we took ratings for our sample of CEOs from Glassdoor.com, a site which allows employees to rate companies. There are several dimensions of ratings on Glassdoor.com, for instance, the percent of people who approve of the CEO of a company, and also overall company ratings, which are the two that I'm going to focus on. So first, let's take a look at CEO approval ratings. Here on the graph, we see the percentage of employees on Glassdoor who approved of the CEO of a company. What we found is that CEOs who disclosed experience in ordinary jobs were rated more highly than those who did not, amounting to about a 9.7% increase in approval ratings. Now, if we take a look at the overall company ratings on Glassdoor.com, ratings on a scale from 1 to 5 for overall impressions of a company, CEOs who disclosed experience in ordinary jobs were again rated more highly, amounting to about a 4.3% increase in their company ratings. Now, we thought that this was really interesting and suggestive, so next we complemented this with an experimental study in which we took advantage of the fact that Jeff Bezos, former CEO of Amazon, actually did work as a fry cook at McDonald's. And we conducted an experiment on Amazon's Mechanical Turk, reminding the workers that we recruited for this study that since they work for Amazon, Jeff Bezos was their CEO, which he was at the time that we ran this study. He since stepped down. Then the workers read an interview in which Bezos either disclosed that he had been a fry cook, did not disclose this, or spoke generally about the value of working in fast food without mentioning his own personal experience. So we could see whether it's really something about personal experience in these jobs or just talking about the value of these jobs generally. Then these workers rated whether they approved of Bezos as their CEO using the same question from Glassdoor.com. And what we found is that disclosing experience in ordinary jobs boosted the ratings of Bezos by 7.1% compared to not disclosing this, and 10.7% compared to talking about working in fast food generally, which, if anything, seemed to have a bit of a backfire effect. So in sum, exposing some human failings or revealing one's ordinary sides can sometimes help leaders to be more effective, illustrating that the most influential leader is not necessarily the one who appears the most impressive, high status, or exceptional, but often the one who appears more human. However, as the investment game study that I shared with you shows, the type of failings, as well as the audience, matter. This suggests that at a time when leaders are often encouraged to expose some weaknesses, leaders should exercise some caution. Not all weaknesses do help to paint one as more human and build connection, so we need to further understand the nuances around disclosures of one's more human sides. So now, to put everything together, I want to leave you with these key insights about why the future of work is indeed very human. First, our beliefs about aspects of the future shape the opportunities that we create. We are not passive recipients of change, we're active co-creators of it. The future is ours to shape, and we should attend to the way that we imagine it, and potential blind spots in these visions, in the conversations in society, as we build our path forward. Second, leadership is about being human. Leaders who focus on people and appear more human can experience even a financial payoff from doing so, highlighting how the most effective leader is not necessarily the one who is most extraordinary or who emphasizes their business acumen above all else, but one who focuses on human relationships. So as we move forward into the future of work, we might encourage leaders to embrace their human sides and focus on human relationality. Now, I want to briefly thank those who supported the research, including seed funding from the Digital Society Initiative that helped to support the global survey I've shared with you as part of the DSI community work, the ADECO group, who collaborated on some of the research, my co-authors from the research projects I've highlighted, collaborators who helped to design both the global survey and the survey on remote work, and the fantastic research assistants and thesis students who spent so much time and energy helping with the data and other aspects of these projects. And now I want to thank all of you for being here and for your attention, and of course, the time and support that many of you in the audience have offered to me as I've pursued these lines of research. So thank you very much for joining me tonight.